In a previous role for a company I once worked for, the owner was fond of saying, "You can't improve what you can't measure." So my thesis topic is, how do we measure the effectiveness of advocacy for key environmental cases? The byline, or perhaps even the conclusion, will be something like, it's not easy to measure the effectiveness of advocacy holistically or even in part. And when you further muddy the waters by going into an area as broad as environmental law, it becomes even more difficult. Still, it's a matter of great and personal interest to myself, and hopefully it's an area that is likely to draw more attention over time. Both environmental advocacy and the idea of measuring the effectiveness of advocacy are still very much emerging. They're fairly new ideas, and the initial research that I've conducted has only really come up with very little, actually, in the way of guiding principles or methodologies. The inspiration that I have for the topic is quite personal. I wish to eventually work in the field of environmental law, and hopefully this exercise will be at least partly instructive as to which direction I might take. Now, community and legal partnerships are probably one of the most visible aspects, and so naturally they'll be one of the main focuses when it comes to selecting cases. I'm also interested in the legal rights of rivers, animals, and other environmental features, something which has had some media attention of late, although it's very likely that those considerations will only be given a light treatment given the constraints. Originally, I hoped to look at a few different cases on either end of the spectrum in terms of size. So I was very interested in the anti-whaling litigation that Australia commenced against Japan in 2014. And at the other end of the scale, the community academic partnership involving the Port Campbell community, who were assisted by the legal academic Brad Jessup to oppose some inappropriate development on the coast front in their town. A very large hotel they'd planned to build, and it was shown that it was possibly going to cause parts of the cliff face to collapse into the ocean. Or that, as the ocean levels rose, that it was going to be quite dangerous. Now, I've since come to realise that that was perhaps a bit ambitious, and I'm setting aside the whaling case heard in The Hague, or at least for the time being. International law is something that I have a keen interest in, but not very much knowledge or experience. So instead, I'll just be focusing on other local cases that are related to the environment. So in the Port Campbell case, it was quite a protracted case. It involved several hearings at VCAT over many years. And another case that's somewhat similar in that regard is the Barringhup Chicken Farm case, which involved a similar amount of debate, community action, and legal advocacy and media coverage. Now, through the course of this research, I hope to have a beer with Brendan Sides, CEO and lawyer for Environmental Justice Australia. I'll also be approaching the other state environmental defender offices to see what, if any, measures they use to quantify their advocacy efforts. Ultimately, I think if any measurement's being conducted by those organisations, it's likely to be qualitative. And while qualitative measures are no doubt important, I'm coming from a somewhat traditional approach to research methodology where qualitative research is usually used to inform larger scale quantitative studies. So there'll also be a bit of a brief discussion about the tensions and interconnectedness between those two modes of measurement. A very brief expression that kind of catches that kind of interconnectedness is, boy, that pizza tasted really good, but it was so small, I was left feeling hungry. So overall, my rating of the meal was average. So there we have the quality. The pizza was good, but the quantity, there wasn't enough of it. Another source I'll be reliant upon is the work of legal academic Liz Curran. Dr. Curran has developed several frameworks for measuring the effectiveness of certain types of legal advocacy, mainly for the benefit of community legal centres. There's a number of similarities between community legal centres and the environmental defender offices, which make her models of interest for this topic. Thankfully, I've also had the opportunity to work firsthand with some of Dr. Curran's models through a series of projects that I've assisted the Loddon Campaspe Community Legal Centre with. So while environmental and community advocacy are different fish, Dr. Curran's methods provide a tested starting point for measuring the effectiveness of advocacy. As foreshadowed, much of her research is qualitative. However, there are some quantitative measures that I'll be able to consider as well. In addition to consulting with the obvious authorities and a few prime cases, I hope to have time to discuss some of the complications of measuring effective advocacy. Some of the top issues are going to be things like enforceability. How are environmentally protective statutes and case rulings upheld? And the erstwhile excluded Japanese case would have been a great example there. It was a big win for Mark Dreyfus and Australia at The Hague, but it didn't really slow down Japan's whaling fleets. So it was an example where legal advocacy was effective in terms of the outcome at court, but not the outcome out in the environment. Political influence is also of interest. How have cases influenced policy? How has policy influenced law? And kind of closing the circle, how is law influencing the outcome of cases? It's likely there'll also be considerations of the time, expense, and return on investment, whether it's in terms of the number of minds that are changed, political will has shifted, or the number of whales and trees that are saved, the carbon emissions that we've reduced, or by possibly how long we've set back the extinctional clock that ticks ominously in the background of our daily lives. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to your questions.